So, do you know if you have anxiety? And if you do know you have anxiety, do you know how it impacts you? The reason why I'm asking is because sometimes people don't even know that they are experiencing anxiety, and the anxiety ends up impacting them, controlling their behavior in a way that they're not really even aware of. And for folks who do know that they have it, they also don't have full awareness about how anxiety is showing up in their lives. And the reality is that anxiety is not all bad. And when we can really understand the purpose and the function of anxiety and how it's impacting us, that's where we have an opportunity to show up in a different way that feels better, that can help minimize some of the anxiety and just help us live a life more aligned with our values rather than being driven by our anxiety without us even knowing about it. I'm Dr. Kit Slies, life coach and licensed psychologist, here to inspire perfectionists and anxious achievers to feel calm and confident while holding clear boundaries. So let's talk a little bit about the function of anxiety. What even is it? Why do we have it? So anxiety is pretty similar to fear. We have a response in our body when we feel threatened by something. There is actually a physiological response in our body that occurs that we feel physically. So what's happening is that that fear response is being set off in our body, and there are reasons that that creates certain physical symptoms. The fear response is designed to help us either show up in the face of a threat and fight the threat, or run from the threat, or to kind of shut down and play dead and hope that the threat just passes us by. So that's that fight, flight, or freeze response you might have heard of before. And so how that shows up is that we might feel an increase in our heart rate. Gosh, even as I talk about it, I feel it. That's how powerful our brains are, is that it can create this response at the turn of a dime for us. So our heart rate increases. You can imagine how that might help you to be able to fight or flee from a threat. And this response developed millions of years ago when we were living out on the savannah, and the main threat at the time was like the lions that we had to run from, right? So our heart rate would increase, delivering more oxygen throughout our body. Also, our breathing is going to quicken for a similar purpose, to be able to get oxygen to our muscles to do what we need to do, right? Other things that might happen, our digestive system shuts down in this response. And the reason for that is because you don't want energy going to digestion when you need the energy to defend yourself or flee, or to also to shut down, to kind of shut all the systems down, right? So that's why sometimes when we feel fearful or anxious, or we get an upset stomach, because that system is sort of taken offline and it's not working the way that it does when we're feeling nice and relaxed and rested. But even things like our eyesight can feel affected, and the way that our attention is diverted to things, it's hard to focus and think logically through things, because the fear response, logic has no place. When you are deciding um, to run from the lion, we don't want to be sitting here thinking about, well, option A, if I run this direction, I can go here, here, and here. It's like, no, you just need to get out, out of there and run. So our ability to kind of plan and be thoughtful about things and concentrate really can shut down. So that is how anxiety and fear are similar. It's the same sort of number of systems that are being impacted in our body: our cardiovascular, our muscular, our digestive system. Like, all these different systems are being activated or turned on or shut down in different ways The difference between anxiety and fear, though, is that fear is a direct response to something in our environment. You hear a loud noise, bam, and you're like, oh, what is that? That is fear. And fear is important, right? We need to have that response in order to be able to make it, to protect ourselves. Anxiety is the same sort of response, but it's usually in response to something that we're thinking up here, something that could happen. It's not a direct response to something in our environment. The important things to keep in mind is that both of these responses come from a place of self-protection. They are protective systems. The other thing to keep in mind is they are not smart systems. Remember how I said that like our thinking, planning kind of shuts down? That's what you need to remember about anxiety, is that it's a signal that's being turned on for you. It doesn't mean, just because that signal is being turned on, doesn't mean that we have to listen to it. The cool thing about anxiety as opposed to fear, if there's not something that we have to immediately attend to, is that we have an opportunity to recognize anxiety for what it is, and to just recognize it as a signal, and then to find ways to access the calming part of our body so that we can get back to that thinking logical place and say, okay, so this signal is being turned on, but what the heck do I need to do about it, if anything? It's a false alarm, right? So how do we do that? That's what we're going to talk about now. Anxiety is a signal. It's not a smart one. What the heck do we do with it when it's happening so that it's not turning on those systems in an unhelpful way and getting us to act in ways that don't serve us? So the first step is to just begin to notice what anxiety looks like in you. Anxiety might look a little bit different in different people, but can include those things, some of the things I've already mentioned. Changes in your breathing, just noticing you're feeling more activated, your heart is racing or something like that. Stomach upset, muscle tension, okay? Headaches, difficulty sleeping, those are all keys, all signals that your anxiety signal might be turning on. So just notice it and then name it. If there's no current threat in your environment, just name it. It's like, oh, this might be anxiety. And it's a signal, and it's not a smart signal, right? In a sense, like there is a wisdom about it. Sometimes you want to listen to it, but it's not, the signal itself doesn't mean that there is a danger that necessarily that we have to attend to, right? That's what I mean about it not being a smart signal. And then if you notice that it's there, thank it for being there, because it is trying to protect you. Oh, good thing my threat system is still working. Whew, glad I've got that going for me. But now I'm gonna just start to evaluate if I really need it, or if it's sort of a false alarm right now. And one way that you can do that is you can just think to yourself, hey, are there things that I'm worrying about that I can do something about? Yes? All right, great. Can I do it now? Yeah, all right, great. Do it. If it's not a hardship for you, if you can knock it off your list, go ahead and do it. And that might take care of the anxiety. If there are things that you can do about the things that you're noticing that you're worrying about in that anxiety, but you can't do them at that moment, go ahead and schedule them, put them in your calendar, write them down somewhere, so you don't have to worry about that you're going to forget about it. And then if there's things that you're worrying about that are triggering the anxiety for you that you can't do anything about, those are the ones you get to practice letting go, reminding yourself that's out of your power, that's out of your control. Refocus on the things that you do have control over. Take a deep breath, just be present in the moment, and let go of those things that you don't have control over. And then the last piece of this is to just become an observer of yourself when you're noticing the anxiety. What else is coming up for you? Where does your mind go? What other feelings, emotions come up for you? How do you tend to respond to the feeling of anxiety? People tend to respond differently. two sort of common reactions to anxiety that cause us to show up in ways that maybe aren't the most helpful and that can actually perpetuate the anxiety. One is to be an overdoer, an over planner, and over just attending to it. But that in and of itself can create more stress and anxiety, because then what that tends to do is that you might tend to feel like, I've got to control everything, and the false belief that you have control over everything, which then creates more stress, because then you're just constantly like, okay, it's a never ending thing. I've got to do. I've got to do things for everybody else because they're not going to do it. I'm going to show up in this way. Okay, those are my anxious achievers, my perfectionists out there. I'm probably speaking to you. Okay, but the other way that sometimes people respond, even if you are an anxious achiever or an overachiever, is that sometimes we shut down, we avoid the thing. Oh, I don't want to take care of it. I just, it's too anxiety provoking. I just can't even deal with it right now. And there's a time and a place for that, to just let go and not deal with things right now. But if we are constantly going to that place, what ends up happening, sometimes the anxiety might go away initially, but the thing doesn't get resolved. Our brain learns that if we avoid, that actually feels good. Oh, hey, I avoided the thing. The brain kind of learns that its job is to keep you avoiding, to reduce the anxiety. It sort of thinks, oh yeah, the signal that I'm sending you is right because you avoided, and then the anxiety went away. And that means that it's something that we should continue to pay attention to at a heightened sense and continue to avoid. But then if the problem is never solved, it just becomes sort of this endless cycle. So just notice these patterns in yourself. Notice if these patterns serve you. There might be ways in which these patterns serve you to some level, but then at some point they create them more stress and anxiety. Observe yourself though without judgment. This is not an opportunity for you to say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I'm dealing with anxiety this way. How could I do this? I know it's not good for me, how horrible I am. That's not the invitation here. The invitation is to become a non-judgmental observer of yourself. And just ask yourself, do you want to show up in a different way? And if you did show up differently, how could you show up differently? And how can you do that in a loving way towards yourself? Maybe even how can you have fun with that? Can you get creative with how you're going to show up differently? Oh, I'm an overdoer, an overplanner, an overthinker. Let me just find a way to plan what feels good enough to plan, and maybe have fun with that, and then let go of the rest. Oh, let me just notice I'm having anxiety right now about this thing that isn't even happening to me. Can I just kind of lovingly laugh with myself at that one? Wow, I really like to plan and overthink. I'm thinking of this thing that's like 2 years in the future or something, right? How can you show up for yourself and for others in a different way is the question. So that's my invitation for you, is to see the anxiety as a protector and to think about showing up for yourself in a different way, reminding yourself what you have control over, what you don't have control over, focusing on those parts that you do have control over, noticing if you hyper focus on the things that you have control over, maybe go too far with that. Again, just notice, non-judgmental, have self-compassion, have fun if you can with that. Acknowledge that you want to protect yourself, and then return to that place of self-love, self-compassion. I hope that this was helpful for you today, and I'll see you next time. Bye.